Would you all please come back in and resume your seats? Thank you. Huh? No, it's okay. Please return to your seats. We're about to begin the second half of our program. Thank you. Final warning, please return to your seats. Thank you. No, you can hang out. What you're supposed to do?
Yeah, I need to.
Oh, you want a handheld? This one's working.
No. A clicker for. So it's ready to go? It's all set. 2 minutes. And I guess my stuff is under your stuff.
Yeah? Is that it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's all right. You can put your stuff
All right.
there. I'm really glad I did black and white. So it can show up. Yeah.
Yeah, we had some problems actually.
You okay starting if there are even a couple of stragglers?
Could everyone please take your seats? Everyone out there, please come back in now. And I'm sorry, we're running a little late. We had a few, even though we had 4 dress rehearsals for technical things, as the peer project has demonstrated, sometimes our minds maybe do interfere with the machines. Because I know, Brendan never uses PowerPoints because of that. So We had 3 technical failures this morning. They all seem to be coming back online now. For those of you who are watching offline, I wanted to offer our apologies because we've had some streaming issues. We've tried plan A, B, and C, but you can really blame the peer project for all of this. And if you don't know what I mean, you're going to have to read the book on the peer project because that explains fully what happened. Everything that's offline, everything that we're doing will be available without the buffering on YouTube later on. So again, to those in the audience, in the internet audience, I apologize to you. We're trying our level best to solve the streaming problem. And we'll begin, I'll turn it back over to our Master of Ceremonies, Joshua Green, and thank you very much. What? To those in the streaming audience, we have defied the peer project and we have fixed it. Maybe we haven't. But it is fixed for the moment. So we need everybody in the room, now let me, if I get this right, to have a good intention for streaming. I need all of your good intentions for the streaming. Yes, please give me an emotional connection to the streaming. Okay.
Still waiting for All right, here's when the skill known as vamping comes into play. We're waiting for the image to return to the screen. So we're learning about the intersect between hard science and psychology, and I suppose Freud will come up at some point in one of these presentations. You know what a Freudian slip is, right? That's when you say one thing and you mean your mother. Professor Louis Ritz is on the faculty of the Department of Neuroscience within the University of Florida College of Medicine and also the McKnight Brain Institute. For many years, his focus was on medical and graduate education. He was a course instructor for clinical neuroscience taken by second-year medical students and is co-author of the textbook, Medical Neuroscience. He is also director of the campus-wide Center for Spirituality and Health, which offers workshops, academic programs, and interdisciplinary research into the impact of spirituality on health. For the undergraduate honors program, Dr. Ritz directs 2 courses, Spirituality and Health and Neurotheology. Most impressive of all of his outstanding credentials, the honors students named Dr. Ritz the 2018 Honors Professor of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Professor Louis A. Ritz.
Thank you, Joshua, and welcome to everybody to Gainesville and to this conference. When I finished college in 1972, a long time ago, I started asking the big questions of life, and I wanted to understand, who am I? Why am I here? What's my relationship to the Creator? And so I took 2 paths, and one was to study the central nervous system, and I subsequently got a PhD in neuroscience, and the other was to get involved in meditation. And a couple early books that influenced me were Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi and Ram Dass's Be Here Now. And after reading those books and going through college, I spent months, probably a year and a half, praying to be led to a God-intoxicated mentor who could help me get answers to my questions. And so I got involved in a type of meditation called Sarat Shabd Yoga, and I will tell you a little bit about the story in a simple PowerPoint today. So the title of my talk is entitled, is Shifts of Attention, the Origins of Transcendent Experiences. So I want to start with a little story about Bulleh Shah. Bulleh Shah was a Sufi mystic and poet from like the 17th century, I think. This is as told by a mentor of mine, Rajinder Singh. Bulleh Shah was a great lover of God, so Bulleh Shah asked his master, Inayat Shah, how to find God. Inayat Shah, who was a gardener by profession, told Bulleh Shah to take the plant from one side of the garden, uproot it, and plant it in the other side. He said, just like you have taken the plant from one area and put it in another, you have to take your attention from the world outside and focus it at the single or third eye or the seat of the soul. You will definitely find God. So today we're going to talk about attention, a critical attribute of our lives. I think it's one of the most important attributes of a human being. We're going to talk about dramatic shifts of attention. I'll talk about objects of attention, these objects of the world that our attention falls on, and we'll have a brief neurological interlude towards the end, and then we'll talk about the passageway to transcendent experiences and expanded consciousness. So I want to start with a little parable. And this is a parable about spacesuits. So there was an entity once who was living in its home domain, and it was all conscious, but it decided to leave that domain and explore another realm. To do so, it had to put on a spacesuit so it could exist in this other realm. And after a while, it decided it wanted to explore a second realm. And so to do so, it had to put on a second spacesuit. So now it's got two spacesuits on. Every time it put on a spacesuit, it had diminished consciousness. So finally, the entity decided to go to a third realm and put on a third spacesuit. So now it's got three spacesuits on. Consciousness is diminished with each spacesuit. And it explored this third and final realm. The entity spent so much time in living in the third realm with these spacesuits on that it only identified itself as the spacesuits and lost its true identity, it no longer remembered its origins. And these spacesuits are called the mind, our emotions, and our physical frame. The role of meditation is to retrain our attention so we can re-achieve higher states of consciousness that were lost when we put these spacesuits on. So what are dramatic shifts in our attention? This is a picture by Hieronymus Bosch. You've probably seen this before. This is called Ascent of the Blessed, depicting the light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe New Jersey is at the end of this tunnel, I don't know. But there are several possible shifts of attention, dramatic shifts of attention. These may not be the only ones. The first is the near-death experience, and I consider this a traumatic shift. This could be due to cardiac arrest, a car accident, a drowning, something happening during an operation. The second shift of our attention can be with meditation, and I call this a tranquil shift, a gentle shift, much more preferred than a near-death experience. And finally, there is the transition called death, which our attention will be withdrawn from the physical frame, and who knows what happens after that. So the next question is, what normally controls our attention? Do we control it? Does our mind control it? Who's under control? Does the world control our attention? Excuse me. One of the analogies that many masters have used is that of a chariot. So the soul is the rider of the chariot, And the driver of the chariot is the mind. The reins going to the horses is our emotions, and the horses are our sense organs that run wild in the fields of sense objects. This is our situation. So, a thought experiment with a picture of a pail with some rocks in it. I couldn't figure out how to really animate this, so we just had to call this a thought experiment. So we want to fill a pail up, and we fill a pail with some large rocks, which are depicted here, and then we add small rocks to the pail, and then we add some pebbles to the pail, and then we add some sand to the pail, and we mix it up. So what if our sense organs could only perceive the large rocks for whatever reason? What if our physical instruments could only perceive the large rocks, and we would be totally unaware of the other rocks, the smaller rocks, and the pebbles and the sand that are in this bucket? And that's our plight. Mystics will tell us that it's all right here. The physical world and the spiritual worlds, they're all right here, but they are at different frequencies. Frequencies that we're not able to comprehend or sense with our normal physical sensory apparatus. Eben Alexander, you probably heard of him, the neurosurgeon who had a brush with death, and it was written up in his book Proof of Heaven. Excuse me. He says that this other grander universe isn't far away physically, but simply exists on a different frequency. We are unaware of it because for the most part we are closed off to those frequencies on which it manifests. For all we know, there's actually small pebbles or small rocks, pebbles, and sand in this picture, but we just can't sense it. So when I think of our attention, which is a major point of this talk, I think of each of us as a beacon of attention. Thank you. Each of us is a beacon of attention. It's like a flashlight, and we shine our attention on something. We shine our attention in the outside world. We shine our attention on this room today. And where our attention falls, when our attention falls on an object of attention, whatever that object is, we are aware of it. And this attention, as mystics will teach us, emanates from the soul, or the Atma, and works its way through the three spacesuits, and then through the brain's mechanisms of attention. It's distributed, our attention is distributed to the outside world. We're aware of the objects of attention that our attention falls on. We're not aware of objects of attention that our attention does not fall on. That's sort of a basic premise. So as we go through life, we can be, what I'm trying to depict here is two worlds. And we have our attention falling on the physical world, and we're all quite aware of it when we drive our car or whatever. And we're not aware of the spiritual world because our attention is not falling on it. If, however, something happens to us, like a near-death experience, or perhaps in meditation, we can learn to shift our attention and move off the physical world momentarily or for a while, and and experience the spiritual realms. Excuse me. Now, as we go through life, the question is, what are we really paying attention to? And I believe there's four categories of objects that we can pay attention to. The first is the outside world, and I'm depicted here in Millennium Park in Chicago. You may have seen the egg if you've been there. And that meant the outside world. We can be aware of things in the outside world. The second is our physical bodies. We can be aware of our physical bodies. We're especially aware of it if we're in discomfort, if we're in pain, we got a toothache or whatever. But you know, you may not even be aware of, you may not be thinking about your bodies right now. You may be, you know, focused on the conference and not paying that much attention to your physical body. The third object of attention is our emotions, whether we're happy or sad or fearful or angry, etc. The fourth object of attention, what I'm trying to depict, is the mind. And I believe that the mind grabs our attention and just demands our attention all the time. You wake up at 4 in the morning, it's there talking to you. And who's talking and who's paying attention? That's an interesting question. Now, I want to take a second just to go off and talk about I'm going to have my neurological interlude here. This is an experiment, and let's see if I can do this. Okay, this is an experiment in which people were in an MRI tube and they were asked to focus on something. And what happened, and their brains were imaged, and we got an idea what parts of the brain were activated during the focus process. Then after a while, they would lose their focus and their minds would wander. They would become aware of their minds wandering, and then they would shift their attention back to the focus. What I'm really trying to show here is that there are two modes of the mind. The mind is always active. It's almost impossible to quiet the mind. It's always active. You can either control the mind or it runs on its own. And so when we use our attention networks to focus the mind on whatever, conversation, reading a book, or whatever, we're going to control things. Otherwise, the mind runs on its own, and that's called mind wandering or daydreaming. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Science has shown that. We wander into the past, we wander into the future, none of which exists. So, some scientists did an interesting study. I think this is relevant, very relevant to my discussion here. Some scientists, and this is not the scientific publication. The publication was Brain and Behavior a couple years ago, but it got picked up the Wall Street Journal, and I decided to use their depiction of this. And it has to do with a mantra. And what they were showing is that techniques using a mantra, and I think a lot of spiritual techniques are using a mantra. When people use a mantra, now a mantra being a set of words, they can be spiritual, they can be secular. When you use a set of words, like during a meditation, the activity of the mind-wandering network, which is called the default mode network. We got these two networks. We've got an attention network and we've got a default mode network. Well, mind-wandering is associated with the activity of the default mode network of the brain. When we do a mantra, as in meditation, the activity of the default mode network is greatly reduced. We can begin to rein in the mind, quiet the mind a little bit by using a mantra. Now, what I'm going to hopefully explain to you is this idea of consciousness evolves when the self dissolves. I love the title of this talk. This is actually not a talk, but it was a publication by Dr. James Austin. Jim is the retired chair of neurology at the University of Colorado, and he wrote an interesting set of books. In 1998, he published a book called Zen in the Brain, and that book, to me, is at the forefront of brain meditation studies. He's gone on to publish about 4 or 5 other books. One listed here, shown here, is Selfless Insight, Zen and the Meditative Transformation of Consciousness. But I like the title that he gave us here, Consciousness Evolves When the Self Dissolves. By the way, Jim is in the audience. Could you just wave your hand, Jim? I'm probably embarrassing him, but he's in the audience, and I'm just delighted that he's here today, and I'm sort of paying homage to his friendship and the work that he's done. So, getting down to the last couple slides. So the question is, as we go through life, what are we paying attention to? The human body is like this giant satellite dish, and we're picking up all sorts of information. Sensory information from the outside world, sensory information from the inside world. We're picking up our emotions, we're picking up our mind, we're paying attention to all of this stuff. And what are we paying attention to? I'm saying, what channel are we watching? We could be watching all 4 of these channels, the channel of the world, the channel of the body, the channel of the emotions, and the channel of the mind. So, but what if during meditation we sit down and we're quiet and we stop paying attention to the outside world? We're in a quiet room, might be in our home, but it's really quiet. We're not paying attention to the outside world. And what happens if we're not paying attention to our body? Our sensory systems are shut down. We're not looking at anything. We're not hearing anything. We're in a quiet environment. We're not touching anybody. We're not smelling anything. We're not tasting anything. So we lose 2 of these channels. Now, these channels are really loud typically. They're easy to pick up. We all pick them up. But what's interesting is every night we go to sleep and we turn off 2 of these channels. We turn off the world and the body. So that should be easy for us to do. We can all do that. So then we got this channel called emotions. What if we sit down and meditate? And if you're a seasoned meditator for a while, you can begin to quiet your emotions. First of all, meditation is great at showing us our emotions. It's a mirror to our inner landscape. And working through the frontal lobes, meditation can help quiet our emotions. So that's another channel. And then we got this last channel. This is the real stickler. This is the tough channel to turn off. But as I just tried to show you, we can quiet the mind by using a mantra. And what are we left with? What are we left with? What channel are we watching then? Well, there's another channel that I have on here, which I call a sacred channel. And this channel is the 3rd or the single eye, which Inayat Shah told Bulleh Shah to put his attention on. And this is one depiction of this 3rd or single eye, which I'm going to call the sacred channel that we can tune into, a subtle aspect of human beings that allows us to go beyond the physical world and burrow our way into the spiritual realms. We have a person, I should give credit to Alex Gray in Sacred Mirrors. I call this Gray's Anatomy, where he's showing the chakras, but the 3rd or single eye is up here at the top. It's where if you close your eyes, your attention's going to be drawn there. So I'm calling that the sacred channel. This slide is entitled, Sit Still and Be Quiet. Did any of your parents tell you that when you were young? They were giving you meditation instructions. Little did we know. So ethical living is a foundation to meditation, but then there's the meditation practice. The one I'm describing here is Jyoti meditation, and when we can focus our attention on this sacred channel, we can begin to transcend awareness of our physical body and this physical realm, and we can enter into the spiritual realms that are all around us and within us. And this is my final slide. I think this picture is called The Seeker, and this is a peak experience, not P-E-A-K, but P-E-E-K. And when we begin to focus our attention at the third or single eye, we can realize a number of things. We can see inner light, we can see circles of light, light of different colors, flashes of light. We can go beyond that, and you can see an inner sky, you can see an inner moon, you can see an inner sun, and then you go beyond that, and the real journey of spirituality can begin. By doing this, we realize we're not the body, we're not the emotions, we're not the mind, we are something else. We are soul or Atma. And we can realize that the light of God shines in every person and interconnects all of us. Thank you very much.
I don't know about you guys, I'm having a blast. Are you having fun here? This is amazing. What an absolutely extraordinary collection of presenters here we have this weekend. Our final speaker this morning is Professor Ricardo Silvestre. Professor Silvestre received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Montreal. Currently he lives in Brazil, that's where the music comes from, where he is professor of philosophy in the graduate program of the Federal University of Paraíba. Am I pronouncing that? Paraíba. Thank you very much. And also serves as adjunct professor of philosophy at the University of Campina Grande. Did I do better with that one? His fields include philosophical logic, epistemology, philosophy of religion, and Indian philosophy. Would you please join me in welcoming Professor Ricardo Silvestre?
Good morning. Well, so I'm here to talk about dualism, which shall be done inside or as part of an attempt to philosophically examine the problem or the project of explaining consciousness. But I'll have to say two things before I start. First of all, I'd like to thank Bob and his team for having organized this amazing conference. Thank you. And second, that it has been a challenge to prepare these presentations. First, because consciousness studies and philosophy of mind are not really my fields. My fields are logic and philosophy of religion. And second, because of the nature of the conference. It's always a challenge to speak to such a diverse audience with different backgrounds. That's why I try to keep things at a very elementary level. I don't know if I succeeded. But anyway, I had a great time preparing the presentation, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Once more. Okay, so I start, of course, speaking about explaining consciousness. So from a very, let's say, general and perhaps naive level or perspective, you can say that we all agree that consciousness should be explained by the methods which are typical of the sciences. After all, science has explained quite successfully many important aspects of the natural world, and consciousness seems to be part of this natural world. It is a property of natural living organisms like us, human beings. It is also widely agreed that science involves what we call naturalism, the idea that in order to explain phenomena, science should appeal only to natural entities, forces, principles, etc. But this has some consequences, some implications. First of all, that understanding consciousness by pursuing the methods of the sciences would be the same as pursuing a naturalist project with respect to consciousness. This is the first consequence. The second one is that dualism, the view that there is an immaterial and substantial self, which is the bearer of consciousness, will be inconsistent with science or with scientific practice, and therefore will have no role to play in the project of rationally explaining consciousness. Okay, so my purpose here will be to philosophically examine this claim, the claim that dualism has no role to play in the project of rationally explaining consciousness. In other words, I'll try to disclose the basic assumptions and the basic concepts which are involved in this claim. So I'll have to deal with those three concepts, of course: naturalism or physicalist naturalism. I will say in a while what that is, explanation, and dualism. And as a positive contribution, or as a speculation, as I prefer to say, I'll introduce a new concept which I call methodological dualism. Due to time, I'll have to skip many important details, okay? An excuse for that, but I hope to be able to provide you with a broad picture of what is involved or what's implied in this claim. All right, once more. Okay, so I start with naturalism. So it's not easy to say what naturalism is. There are a lot of definitions, and scholars usually are not as clear as we want. But here is a tentative definition, according to which naturalism is the thesis that everything that exists, be it an object, kind, property, law, force, or principle, is natural or is included in the natural world. Scholars usually make a distinction between ontological naturalism and methodological naturalism. This definition is a definition of ontological naturalism. It is ontological because it is a claim about what exists in reality. Methodological naturalism, in its turns, makes no such a claim. It is concerned with how we should conduct scientific practice. That in order to explain phenomena, science should only appeal to natural objects, kinds, properties, etc. So the idea is that science should be concerned with methodological naturalism and not with ontological naturalism. And it's reasonable that you think so, because in some way we can say that explanations should come first, and ontology should come after. What I mean is like that. Suppose that you have a phenomena that has to be explained. You have several theories which are trying to explain the phenomena. So once we have a winner, a theory that explains better than the others, so we are going to look or try to see what are the implications ontologically of the theory. Okay, so it makes sense to say that science should be concerned mainly with methodological naturalism. But the definition I have just given perhaps might be accused of being circular, because I have to say what natural is in order to say what naturalism is. And here again we have many options. Okay, we have what is called scientific naturalism, for instance, which says that the natural are those entities, property, laws, forces, and principles disclosed or studied by science, or by ideal science. Again, also, there is a kind of circularity here, because we are told that science should be concerned with the natural, but we define the natural in terms of science. All right? I'm not totally against circular definitions. They might be useful, and I'm going to come back to this definition later. But anyway, because of that, most scholars agree that the most promising path is to define the natural in terms of the physical. So naturalism, So natural objects, kinds, property, laws, etc., will be simply physical objects, kinds, properties, etc. But here again, it's not easy to say what a physical object is. Again, we have several choices, several answers. Each one of them has its own problems. For instance, if we say that a physical object is whatever can be sensed, we might ask, sensed by whom? Different living beings and different human beings, they have different sensory abilities, so this definition seems to be too subjective. Okay? So I won't go through all of them, but anyway, if we do define the natural in terms of the physical, naturalism turns into physicalism, or into physicalist naturalism, which is the thesis that everything is physical. All right? Here again, philosophers, they disagree about the best way to explain the expression everything is physical. So that's why philosopher David Lewis he proposed to use the notion of supervenience to capture the minimal or the core commitment of physicalism, okay? So he explains the notion with the help of a dot matrix picture analogy, which is quite useful for us to understand it. So a dot matrix picture has global properties. It might be a picture of a lion, for instance. But yet, all there is to the picture is dots and non-dots. So we say that those global properties, they supervene on the local or micro dot properties. So in other ways, we say that no two pictures could differ in their global properties without differing somewhere in their micro dot properties. So here the idea is that the mental supervenes on the physical. So if you use like the same definition here, and this is the best definitions for supervenience, we're going to say that this means, the fact that the mental supervenes on the physical, it means that no two possible worlds can be identical in their physical properties, but differ in their mental properties, okay? With that notion at hand, we define supervenience physicalism, or like de Villiers called it, minimal physicalism, which is the thesis that no possible world can be physically identical to the current world without being identical to it in all respects. See that this is a very heavy metaphysical definition. In fact, the thesis that everything is physical is a metaphysical definition. You can't prove it from the scientific, from the experiential point of view. It's something that is beyond the physical. The thesis that everything is physical. And in order to make this thesis clear, we get a very heavy metaphysical definition, which uses the concept of possibility, which is a metaphysical concept, and the concept of possible worlds. I come back to that later. All right, now we might ask to what extent consciousness studies is influenced by physicalism. Okay, I'm going to just use two quotations here just to give you an idea of what goes on. So this is a quote by philosopher John Searle, where he says something very, very heavy. He compares physicalism, or materialism, as he calls it, with religion. And he says that, like most traditional religions, physicalism, or materialism, as he calls it, is accepted without question. It provides a framework within which other questions can be posed, addressed, and answered. And someone who seems to agree with him is Bernard Baars, the originator of this influential theory of consciousness, the global workspace theory. He says that there is no reason to doubt the empirical status of consciousness. So the fact is that work done in consciousness studies seems to be very strongly influenced by physicalism. And this can be said for sure about the work done inside philosophy of mind, okay? And it should be clear also that what at stake here is not methodological naturalism or methodological physicalism, it's ontological physicalism. Usually, at least inside the philosophy of mind, people are concerned here really with ontology. All right. Okay, good. But I'm going to go quickly through that. We might ask if we accept, say, the worldview of physicalism. We might ask how it's going to explain consciousness. So people agree that it should be a reductionist explanation. The same way, say, that the liquidity of water is explained from the microproperties of collection of H2O molecules. So in the same way, mental properties should be explained in terms of brain or physical properties. All right, even though some people call themselves non-reductivist physicalists, at least we can say that this is the standard view regarding explanation when we consider physicalism. Okay, I go quickly through that. Some people, there's a growing feeling, we can say, that this kind of explanation is doomed to failure. And there are at least three ways we can look at it. First one, from a, say, pre-philosophical and intuitive view. Basically, we feel that physicalism can't explain some basic aspects of life. And here we have a quote by Schrödinger. But you can take a look also from a factual perspective, that we have 50 years of attempts of of explaining from a physicalist point of view consciousness, or at least some aspects of consciousness, and many people see that there is a failure, that they weren't able to explain many aspects like phenomenal consciousness or qualia, like Martin explained to us, intentionality, even rational thought. I could add to this the unity of consciousness and subjectivity. So many people, this is not a consensus, okay, but many people believe that we can't have, at least there wasn't success in terms of explaining these aspects. But there is also another perspective that we can take, which is a conceptual perspective. So according to this perspective, it's not only that these theories weren't able so far to explain those aspects, but they can't explain those aspects. So I'm going to explain this argument. It's quite interesting, and just to give you an idea of what goes on inside this philosophical debate, okay? So this is an argument for the impossibility of a physicalist explanation based on qualia, which Martin kindly explained, so I won't explain it. So it has 6 premises and those 2 conclusions. The first one is just a restatement of physicalism. And here we see the consequences of this definition being very heavy from a metaphysical point of view. The heavier a definition, or the heavier a thesis is, the easier it is to refute it, okay? And here we're going to see that it's quite easy to refute it. So here's the definition of physicalism. No possible world can be physically identical to W, where W is our current world, without being identical to it in all respects. So the second one, John, it might be Ricardo, it doesn't matter, has qualitative conscious experience in W, in our world. The third one, and there is a possible world, say Z, which is physically identical to W, However, in this world, John is a zombie. Okay, we are just saying that zombies are possible, and most of us agree on that zombies, we know that zombies don't exist, okay? But most of us agree that they are possible. I mean, it's possible that they exist. They could exist. So this is a statement of that there's a possible world in which John is a zombie. But in this world, John has no qualitative conscious experience. He has no qualia. This is the philosophical definition of a zombie. A zombie, it behaves like a normal human being, but there's nothing inside. A zombie has no qualia. That's just a definition, okay? But from that we get a contradiction. We get that Z is not identical to W in all respects, because in Z, John has no qualia. But we get that Z is identical to W in all respects from the definition of physicalism. So due to this contradiction, we can conclude that no physicalist theory of consciousness can explain qualia because of the inconsistency. You can't explain one thing from another thing if both of them are contradictory, right? Okay. So suppose that we agree with that, okay, that there is this failure. We might ask what to do. What to do? So we have some options. We might think of giving up, like some people do think, okay? The problem is too hard